Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight I want to welcome Graham Phillips. He has been one of Britain's best-selling nonfiction authors for over 30 years. In the 1980s, after working as a radio journalist and broadcaster for the BBC and editing a popular monthly magazine, he turned his talents to investigating unsolved historical mysteries and has since written 16 books that are in print around the world and have been published in many different languages. Graham, welcome. How are you tonight?
Very well. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I've been looking forward to this because tonight we're discussing your book, The Green Stone, and it's a fascinating story. It includes so much like channeling with ghosts and aliens, chasing down clues that follow a fascinating trail of mystery. And it led you all down an amazing adventure, all surrounding this mysterious green stone. But first, tell us more about yourself and your background and what brought you to writing about these topics.
Well, the Green Stone story was actually the first book I wrote 40 years ago, pretty much exactly. And it's just been republished as a 40-year anniversary special edition with new photographs and some previously unpublished material. But how I got into writing that originally is I started life as a journalist with BBC Radio in England. And then I was editing a magazine called Strange Phenomena. Now, obviously, you can gather by that name that we investigated some pretty weird, unusual goings on. But my sort of interest at that point, I had no real interest in the paranormal. It was just a job as an editor of a magazine as a journalist. And it was based in the town of Wolverhampton, which is in central England. And we had this big old Victorian house that was the office. And the story I'll tell you about basically ended up with us investigating a strange historical mystery to begin with. And I got so fascinated by historical mysteries that since then, I moved away from journalism into writing books and investigating worldwide historical mysteries, such as the legend of King Arthur, the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, a whole host of fascinating historical mysteries that had never been solved. And they had nothing to do with the paranormal. They were all pretty sort of straightforward historical investigations. And I'd had the books I've had published since then, like the King Arthur, The True Story, which was an investigation searching for King Arthur, his Camelot, and who he might have really been. Did he exist? A book called The Search for the Grail, all about the Holy Grail. Did it exist? What was it? Why are people so fascinated with it? And a number of other books along those same kind of lines. And I've been published pretty much throughout the world, really, I suppose, since then. And I've been doing that ever since. And as you said, I think my website says 16 books. I think it's up to 18 now that I've had published over the years. And I've been published by just about every publisher in the world, from Random House, Simon & Schuster, Macmillan, you name it. My books are now published by an American publisher called Inner Traditions, who are based in on the East Coast, and that's what I do now. But because the Green Stone is still my favourite adventure, if you like, because it was the first one I really undertook into historical mysteries. But it wasn't just an historical mystery, because, as you said, it ended up involving all sorts of weird paranormal stuff. So really, what I'm going to be telling you about tonight, what we'll be talking about, is how it really all started off for me.
Yes, and it is such an amazing story. And it's like you said, it's a great adventure. It's no wonder that you're considered a real life Indiana Jones when you read this book and you look at this story. The path it took you on is so fascinating. So where and how did this all start for you, and when?
Okay, 1979. I was a young man. I was as I said before, the headquarters of this magazine, the offices, was this big old rambling Victorian building on a leafy close in the suburbs of the city of Wolverhampton, which is pretty much smack bang in the middle of England. And we were investigating all sorts of different, mainly paranormal mysteries. But there was one, we wanted to try and look at something which was perhaps a little bit different. And there was this legend that we were fascinated by, a number of us working for the magazine. And it concerned this green gemstone that was said to have belonged to Mary, Queen of Scots. There are portraits painted of her. She was the Queen of Scotland in the mid-1500s, but she was also the heir to the British throne of the childless Queen Elizabeth I. Now, Queen Elizabeth I was a Protestant. Mary, Queen of Scots, was a Catholic. She actually got booted out of Scotland for being a Catholic by the Protestant Presbyterian regime that took over there. She fled to England expecting Elizabeth to look after her because she was her cousin. But Elizabeth, fearing that Mary might try and take the throne from her, and Catholics in England, because at the time it was the Reformation, and Protestants and Catholics were pretty much head to head in England. There was the monarchy was swinging back and forth between a Protestant monarchy and a Catholic monarchy, and each time whoever was in charge was pretty much persecuting the other lot. And Elizabeth and her ministers certainly didn't want to see the throne go back to a Catholic. And so they arrested Mary, Queen of Scots, when she fled to England, and she remained under house arrest for many years until she was eventually executed for supposedly being involved in a plot to assassinate Elizabeth and seize the throne. It was probably all trumped up by various ministers of the Queen. But she was supposed to have had, and as I say, there's paintings of her with this silver ring on her finger with this green stone in it. And it was, being a Catholic, she was very into holy relics, and it was supposed to have been some ancient ring that, according to some legends, had once belonged to the biblical King Solomon. So it was many hundreds of years old. But the look of the ring, it obviously wasn't on a man's finger. I mean, she was a small woman. So if the stone might have been on a ring that was much older and belonged to a man, but the ring that she was wearing in these pictures, it's clearly, you know, it's had a stone being fitted into a smaller ring for a woman. Anyway, this ring was supposed to hold various supernatural powers. It wasn't like other holy relics, the Holy Grail, for instance. You're supposed to be able to drink from it and be cured of ills. The Ark of the Covenant was supposed to have been a radio for talking to God, and some kind of ancient biblical weapon, if you like, if you believe the Indiana Jones films. But this ring was supposed to have the power to do all sorts of strange supernatural things. A writer at the time, a man called Dr. John Dee, who was an occultist in Britain, and he was the astrologer, the royal astrologer to Queen Elizabeth I. He said that this ring was supposed to have the power to alter reality itself, to open a gateway to heaven, I think he was trying to say what it was able to do. If it was a stone on the ring that had belonged to King Solomon, that was in legend supposed to be able to summon angels and vanish demons, vanquish demons, that sort of thing. So this was a holy relic. Now, when Mary was executed, Queen Elizabeth ordered that all of her possessions be seized and destroyed, lest they become regarded as holy relics by Catholics of England and used for what they would be considered to be popish rituals, as they would call them, the Protestants. There was a genuine fear that if she had items that had belonged to her and miracles could be attributed to them, she might be canonized by the Pope for being executed as a martyr to her cause. And to become a saint, you have to have had miracles attributed to you in some way. Well, this might have got Catholics in England behind Mary's cause, and perhaps brought about a call for a Catholic monarch again in Britain. But this didn't happen. So all of her possessions were ordered to be seized, but they couldn't find this green stone on this silver ring. And the legend is that a group of Catholics in Britain got hold of this ring. One of them visited Mary when she was still in prison, managed to smuggle the ring out, and it was eventually owned a few years later by the gunpowder plotters. They're the Catholics that tried to overthrow the new monarch after Elizabeth died, James I, in 1605, by blowing up the Houses of Parliament. You've heard of the almost legendary Guy Fawkes, who was caught trying to blow up the King and his Parliament on November the 5th, 1605. Well, that group of people, one of them called Robert Catesby, who was actually the leader of the plot, not Guy Fawkes, as eventually, according to what various people had written at the time, seems to have got hold of this stone. But what happened was that when the gunpowder plot went wrong and it was uncovered and they were all hunted down and killed, Catesby somehow, before he died, was able to hide it. Now, he died not very far from Wolverhampton, where I was living, where the headquarters of the magazine was. And the story was that one of his friends, another Catholic, a man called Humphrey Packington, who lived at a nearby Elizabethan manor called Harvington Hall, got hold of this ring, hid it so that the authorities couldn't find it. And because he suspected that he was going to be executed himself, he got away with it in the end, but he was under house arrest for years. He is supposed to have left a whole series of clues as to where he'd hidden this ring for some future Catholic sympathizer to find, somewhere in his home at Harvington Hall. And various people over the years had searched Harvington Hall, this old Tudor manor house, in the hope of finding whatever these clues were as to where it might be hidden. But nobody had succeeded. So we thought that's a fascinating story. It's not supernatural as such. Of course, well, the ring itself was supposed to have supernatural properties, but it was a fascinating mystery we decided to look into for the magazine. So we decided we'd go in search and see if we could discover the clues, at least, at Harvington Hall as to where the ring was supposed to have been hidden.
Now, there were also some strange circumstances that fueled your curiosity to go search for this, right? You had some people approaching you with some strange information.
Yeah, I mean, nobody knew that we had decided. There's 2 or 3 of us involved in this research, and it had only been going on for a few days. And one of the journalists who worked for the magazine, one of the investigators, phoned us up one night. Remember, think back 40 years ago. Nobody had mobile phones. It was all telephones. People didn't have the internet. There was no way that people were getting in touch with each other. So if people were coming up with information from the other end of the country and people didn't know each other, you couldn't say, well, they've contacted each other on social media or something. This just wasn't known back then. So when this guy got in touch with us and said he'd actually, he knew a family friend of his, this guy was called Terry Shotton, and a family friend of his, a man named Alan Beard, who was not in any way interested in the paranormal at all, had this strange vision when he was actually talking to Terry one day on the telephone, and said that he'd had this vision of a green stone mounted on an old silver ring. He'd never had anything like that happen to him before. And he suddenly had this kind of image come into his mind. I may say a vision. I mean, he didn't go off into a trance or anything. But he just felt impelled to tell Terry about it and said, I think you ought to tell people at your magazine about this, because I think you've got to find it. And so when we suddenly got a telephone call from this guy, he wasn't in on what we were doing. Terry didn't know anything about it. Alan Beard certainly didn't, because we didn't even know him. And for him to phone up and say, I think you ought to find this green stone that's on an old silver ring, we just couldn't believe it. It was astonishing. But it wasn't just him. I mean, we thought that was weird enough. But there was a number of people, for example, a lady that didn't know any of us, who was she'd actually, her daughter had a UFO encounter. And so somebody from the magazine had interviewed her and her daughter about that. So she knew of our magazine, but didn't know anybody involved in it, apart from one guy who went to interview her. She couldn't have known anything about what we were doing. And she also got in touch and said that she'd had a dream of a green stone that she thought we ought to go in search of. So we thought, God, it's getting really interesting now. Not only is this this legend, but we've got 2 or 3 more people coming up with these dreams and visions and psychic impressions of a green stone at exactly this time. We thought, well, it's certainly worth visiting Harvington Hall to see if we can find these clues.
And weren't people actually having extraterrestrial encounters, or what they thought were encounters with extraterrestrial beings telling them about this green stone and about this information?
Yeah, this is the weird thing. I mean, what I've told you there is probably the sensible end of what was happening. Somebody having a dream, psychic dream. Wow, pretty amazing. A guy suddenly having a vision. Both of these people, like Marion and Alan, had never had anything psychic happen to them before, which was odd. But there was a group of people, there was a family down in southern England who had been out one night driving home, and they'd seen this light, and the next thing they know, they were at home, and like they'd lost 2 hours from their lives. It was the first abduction case in Britain, and this had happened in 77 or 78. It was the first supposed alien abduction case in Britain, and one of the members of the magazine had actually investigated them. And what was happening to them, to I think it was the mother of this family, she was put under hypnosis to see if she could remember anything to do with what had happened on board this alien craft that they thought they'd been abducted on. And she was just typically talking through what we would now expect people who'd been hypnotized, had abduction experiences, being taken aboard an alien craft, being probed and all that sort of thing. And she was saying, oh, I can see these creatures, they have large eyes, they're telling me something, they're saying that they're here to investigate. And she suddenly went, also, you must find a green stone on an old silver ring, phone a magazine called Strange Phenomena and tell them about it. And then they probed me further, and just in the middle of it, and this guy who was doing the hypnosis was so kind of what the hell has that got to do with anything, that he actually phoned up, got in touch with our magazine, because I mean it was available in newsstands all over the place. He got in touch and said, this is crazy, and then related what I've just said to you. And we were thinking, that's just mad. Aliens telling us to look for it. I mean, I can understand people having psychic visions, but this strange alien bit, I just didn't understand how that came into it. But then there was another case of some students in Bristol, which is in the west coast of England. And they were doing a Ouija board session one night, the glass and letters. And they got in touch with some spirit, somebody's aunt who had died or something, saying, oh, yes, it's spelt out on the glass, and the letters spelt out, you need to look after your money. Your Uncle Joe is very unhappy about the way you're spending too much of your inheritance. And by the way, get in touch with Strange Phenomena magazine. And it spelt it all out, gave the phone number, told them to phone them up and tell them they should be looking for a green stone. Now, so not only have you got people having dreams, psychic visions, you've got somebody recounting an alien abduction, suddenly being interrupted, saying, tell these people to find a green stone. You've also got supposedly a departed spirit suddenly interrupting a conversation and telling a bunch of students in Bristol who had nothing to do with this whatsoever that we got to find this stone. So it was just crazy. I mean, I'd never heard of anything like that before or since.
Yes, that's amazing. And then you actually had an experience, I believe, where you were hypnotized and you actually came out with a little bit of information about this. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. We were so fascinated by this that we couldn't go and visit Harvington Hall because I think it was closed for renovation. It was open to the public, still is today. So it's, this, not renovated, it's being re as it was in Elizabethan times. So you can go around it with all the old furniture and everything. And that's what it was like then in 1979. But we couldn't go there because it was closed for the holidays or something. I can't remember. We couldn't go there. So we thought, well, let's sort of see if we can try and find out how these messages are coming to these people. And Andrew Collins, who is also quite a famous author these days, he's had a lot of books published about historical mysteries. He's well known for investigating Göbekli Tepe. He's one of the first people to investigate that. And he was working for the magazine at the time. He was like the chief reporter. He had some crazy idea. He said, Graham, why don't I try and hypnotize you? Because he'd just been learning how to do hypnosis. He'd gone on some course. And I said, you'll never get me under hypnosis. So he said, we'll have a few drinks. So we were just joking around, really. And we were in the office at the magazine one night after everyone had gone home. And I was getting absolutely sloshed, drinking vodka. So, he said, I'll try and hypnotize you. And I thought, yeah. And as far as I know, he started counting backwards and doing all the stuff. And I just thought I'd passed out or gone to sleep at best. And no time seemed to have passed, but I kind of fell asleep, woke up, and he was standing over me saying, oh my God, Graham, you went off. I managed to hypnotize you. And you suddenly started speaking in this whispering voice about the green stone. I said, no. I said, there's no way. I said, he said, you did. And you started to mention various characters through history who were supposed to have had this. And he said, but there was apparently some pharaoh in ancient Egypt had this green stone. I said, well, what was he called? He says, I can't remember, but I've managed to record it. And he played back the recording of my voice. But the thing was, it hadn't recorded. It was just static. And yet he'd tested it out before, and there was nothing wrong with it. We tested it out afterwards. There was nothing wrong with the tape recorder. It's an old-fashioned tape recorder, if people remember those kind of things, a cassette recorder. And the only thing that had come out on it was my voice whispering the name of this pharaoh that he'd forgotten about, saying the name Akhenaten, who was a pharaoh believed to have been either the uncle or father of Tutankhamun. And my voice, but the weird thing is, he said, you only said the name once of Akhenaten, but on this tape, you've got my voice saying Akhenaten, but it's all echoey and repeating itself, going, Akhenaten, Akhenaten, Akhenaten. He said, but you never said that. And I thought, well, hearing my own voice speaking on the tape, even though I'm whispering, it was clearly me. And this weird thing, at first I just thought he was having me on, I hadn't got off into any kind of trance. But evidently, I was able to pick this stuff up. I don't really think I was so much hypnotized, but drunk. So with all this happening, I couldn't really because until that point, I was thinking, maybe we're being hoaxed here. These people, various places in the country, could know each other somehow. And some rival magazine had thought, right, let's just make these people look stupid, come up with this crazy tale, and see if they go along with it. And then when we publish something about it, they can say, yeah, well, we all made that up. See how gullible you are, But I thought, well, there's no way, because there's no way these people could have known each other. How would they even know we were looking for a green stone? But, that idea was in my head, that we were being hoaxed. But when I'd actually heard my own voice on tape, basically, in a trance, doing this Akhenaten thing, saying Akhenaten over and over, and having to accept that Andy had somehow got me to give information about the green stone and how the clues would be found now at Harvington Hall, I thought, this isn't a hoax. This is something really weird.
Well, not only that, but didn't you bring in a good bit of these people and interview them just to kind of vet them and make sure that they aren't, pulling your leg?
Oh yeah, over the next few weeks, we sometimes we went, and but in most cases we had to go to where they were, and we were checking out all sorts of things. Could they have known each other? No. I mean, these days, as I say, on social media, anyone can know anyone anywhere in the world. But back then, you've got a bunch of students, hippies basically, living down in the southwest of England. You've got an ordinary everyday family living in near London, who would have nothing in common with each other, a middle-aged lady who was basically just a home, used to call them housewives back then. Basically, she was a homekeeper from Wales on the west of Britain, and another guy who is a lineman for a telephone company. I mean, they're just all different types of people from different walks of life. I mean, but as far as I was concerned, there was something going on, and I checked through all the records of various other paranormal research groups to find out if they'd ever known anything like this happen before. And basically, they said no. and so, it was just, so it started really, really weird and just got weirder from there.
So then you obviously decide to go investigate further. Take us through what happened next. You actually go to Harvington Hall?
Yeah, myself and Andrew Collins decided to go there. And when we turned up, we asked the guide, the head guide there that shows you around and gives you a guided tour. We said, is there anything? We told them about the legend of this green stone and everything. They knew all about that, and they said, yeah, but I don't know, we just think that's, it's just a legend. It probably isn't true that there was clues left here. There was this green stone, but what happened to it, who knows? But we said, well, has anything been, is there anything you could suggest that could be these clues? Has anything ever been found? They said, well, the only thing that's been found is when we were recently doing renovations to the building, we did make an astonishing discovery. In an upstairs corridor, a long upstairs windy corridor, there was paneling, oak paneling, wooden paneling along one wall. And when this was removed during the renovations, they found that sealed up behind it, there was a great big wall mural, a wall painting, and it dated from the early 1600s. And it was even signed by, or having been commissioned for, Humphrey Packington, the very man who was supposedly had left clues as to where this green stone was, the man who'd hidden it. So we said, well, could that be it? They said, well, it's certainly interesting that should just have been found. Now, I thought, that's a weird coincidence. That's been hidden there for, for three and a half centuries, and no one's actually found it until just recently when we've come along looking for it. So we thought, even though the people who ran the place were skeptical that it might hold clues, we thought, we've got to go and have a look at this wall painting. It dates from Packington's time. Why had he boarded it up? And why had it been boarded up for so many years and nobody had found it? So that's what we decided to go and take a look at and see if it did really hold clues.
So then what did you find, in this painting, in this mural?
Well, this mural, which obviously originally had been in colour, was pretty much faded to looking like a black and white stencil drawing, really, but it was pretty large on this whole wall. It was called the Nine Worthies because it depicted 9 heroic figures from history and legend. There was characters from the Bible in there, such as Samson, and there was other heroic figures such as Geoffrey de Boulogne, who was the first king of Jerusalem after the Crusaders invaded, and things like this. So there's these 9 heroic figures from both history and legend. But the central figure was a youthful King Arthur wielding the magic sword Excalibur. Now, the reason that we were suddenly drawn to the Arthur image wasn't just that it was the central feature of the Nine Worthies mural. It was that while I'd been in this trance state, or whatever you want to call it, one of the things that Andy said that I said is that there was some legend that it had once been set in the hilt of King Arthur's sword Excalibur. And we'd already checked out that that was the case, that the legend was, in fact, John Dee had mentioned in his writings that one of the stories about this green stone, which incidentally they called the Meoniah stone, was that it was once set in the hilt of King Arthur's sword. Well, I had no knowledge of this whatsoever. And so when we actually found that in a history book, we thought, well, that is pretty weird. I mean, as far as I know, I'd never read that anywhere. I mean, you don't know what's in your unconscious, but I'm sure I'd have remembered that. I've known a lot about King Arthur since, but at the time, I didn't know anything about the legend at all, pretty more than anybody, no more than anybody else. But so we knew there was a possible connection between the green stone and King Arthur's Excalibur. And there in the center of this wall mural is Arthur himself, a youthful Arthur wielding Excalibur. So we thought, that's got to mean something. So what did it show? Well, it showed Arthur wielding Excalibur, and he's looking down and to his left. And behind him, there's a hill, and his knights are gathered on that hill. Now, cutting a long story short now, I mean, we didn't do this overnight. It took some time to figure this out. Somebody came up with the idea, and I can't remember who it is now. It might be in the book, but I don't know. Somebody came up with the idea that, I mean, it's been a long time since I've actually read the book myself. So I can't really remember off the top of my head now who it was. But somebody came up with the idea, what about if this painting somehow represents something on the landscape, a landmark where this stone could be hidden? And we took to looking at the map, a map of the area around Harvington Hall, and we did find that there was a hill nearby called Knight's Hill. And in this painting, the knights of Arthur are gathered on a hill behind Arthur. And we discovered that at the bottom of this hill, there are two lakes joined by a short stream, over which there is an old footbridge. And we looked at the old maps, and it was there in Tudor times. So it had been there in Humphrey Packington's day. And the name of this bridge locally, people locally referred to it as Arthur's Bridge. Now, whether that had anything to do with King Arthur or a guy called Arthur who had built it, who knows? But you've got this Arthur's Bridge at the bottom of this Knight's Hill. And so you've got Arthur standing there in the painting with the knights behind him, holding a sword that was supposed to have had this green stone set in it at some point. So we thought, wow, we've got to go and take a look at this area, this bridge and this hill, and maybe the green stone is hidden somewhere there.
Definitely, yeah. This is amazing. So, it starts out, you're interested in this case, then you start getting these strange messages from people channeling, telling you to further go look for this. You have a hypnosis session and come out with information yourself. You make it to Harvington Hall and you find this amazing mural and you follow the clues there. Now you're at this bridge. So what do you do once you get to the bridge?
Well, basically we decided, myself and Andrew Collins, me and Andy, when we'd kind of figured this out, we thought, we were so excited, we thought we just got to go there straight away. We got stuck in traffic. It was October time, so it got dark relatively early, and by the time we got there it was dark. But the interesting thing is, just before we set off, we got a phone call from Alan Beard. Now, he was the guy that was the first person to have a vision of this green stone when he'd been talking to this other guy on the phone. He'd suddenly had this image of the green stone on a ring, in his mind's eye. He phoned us up We haven't told him anything about having found this mural or anything. He knew nothing. Nobody else knew anything about this, apart from just a few of us in the office. He got in touch and he said, I've just had another of these visions. And the bottom line was, he felt that we were actually not looking for the green stone initially, but a sword, and a sword which would somehow lead us to the stone. It was a kind of intermediate clue, if you like. So we suddenly thought, you know, wow. I mean, we've just looked at a mural that has King Arthur's sword on it. We've been looking into that. We hadn't told anybody else that we were looking for a sword, or that a sword had anything to do with the story. And then he'd had another vision now, after his one about the green stone, that we were looking for a sword. So we thought, well, maybe we are. But it wasn't just him. We also got another phone call in the office before we left. Remember, we hadn't got mobiles on us, so it's all, you know, telephones in the old-fashioned way. We also got a phone call from Marion. She was the lady who had the dream of the greenstone, whose daughter had a UFO encounter. She phoned us up to say that she'd had a dream, that she'd seen in this dream a stone slab, and on top of it was like a slim sword. And she thought that at this stage we were looking for a sword. Now, she didn't know Alan Beard. She didn't know what we were doing. She'd been accurate before. And she said that she thinks we're looking for a sword at this point. And she says that she knows, she thinks we'll when we find it, she said she couldn't see anything but apart from this dark image of a sword on a stone. But she could smell this overpowering stench of like rotting vegetation. And she says, I think you're going to smell that when you're near where the sword is. Alan Beard also said at the same time that he had the vision or impression that we would know we were on to where this sword was hidden, because there was a big holly bush right next to it. So we were looking for a sword. Two people had told us this, looking for a sword. It's on a stone of some kind, or a stone slab. And there is a holly bush nearby and this overpowering smell of rotting vegetation, if we're to take their joint messages together. So we set off to Knight's Pool in the dark. By the time we actually got there, because it was quite some miles from where we were, it was quite some way off the main road. I mean, it was just in fields in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by a wood. And there was this lake, and the bridge was at the end of it. And so we got there in the dark. And it was pretty spooky, really, because, you know, we knew that so many people had these weird visions and whatnot. And now we were there in the pitch blackness, you know, just with flashlights to try and examine this bridge, which was Arthur's Bridge below the hill. Now, when we got up there, one of the first things we noticed, there was a big holly bush right on top of it. It had been all overgrown. There was a holly bush actually growing out of the bridge on the top. So we thought, wow, you know, that kind of made us think that it's got to be the bridge we're looking for. I think it was me who worked out, well, where do we look in the bridge? Is it hidden in the bridge, under the bridge? Where? In the painting, Arthur is standing there with the knights on his hill over his left shoulder. Now, if you stood on the bridge with Knight's Hill over your left shoulder, the moon was actually, you could actually see the silhouette of the hill behind us. If you stood with the Knight's Hill behind you to your left, then you'd be looking out onto the bigger of the two lakes. Arthur is looking down and to his left. And if you were to look down and to your left, it took you right below where this holly bush was, to the foundation stones at the side of the bridge. And we thought, well, that may be behind one of these foundation stones that this sword, or maybe the stone, was hidden. Marion had seen a dream, a sword on a stone. So maybe it was like hidden behind one of these stones to the left of the bridge, as you looked out onto the lake with the Knight's Hill behind you. Andy then said, we said, well, which one of these stones? You know, there's loads of them. And he eventually worked out maybe 9 stones along and 9 stones down from the bridge, if Arthur is standing in the middle of it, so to speak, in the picture. So eventually we managed to sort of hack our way through the bramble. The whole side of it was overgrown with brambles and thorns and nettles and all sorts of stuff. And we got stung and everything trying to get down there. But we got down to the side of the foundations of the bridge and counted the 9 stones across and down. And we found there was a stone, and the stone was firmly in place. It was clearly, it had never been taken out. There was moss growing over it. There was brambles on it and everything. It had obviously been there like that for years. But we managed to find the right stone. And the boat, when we got down to this stone, both myself and Andy had the same thought, because we could both smell this hideous smell of rotting vegetation coming from the old water that was just down below us. So we've got a holly bush directly above us. There was this rotting smell of vegetation, as Marion said. We thought, we've got to be in the right position. So we eventually managed to get this stone out. I mean, we had no idea whose land it was on or anything. And we were literally causing criminal damage on somebody's private property here. It was just fields. There was nothing else around there, you know, trees and stuff. So we managed eventually to remove this stone block, which I don't know, it was about 2 feet wide, but a bit wider than that, and about 1 foot high and about 1 foot deep. And we eventually, by getting around the sort of cement or whatever it was around it, we finally managed to pull it out. And Andy shone his flashlight into the inside where the stone had been removed. And you could clearly see there was this recess, this little alcove behind it. And we both saw it at the same time. We thought, oh my God, it was clearly some sort of short sword or long dagger. Wow. Laying on a stone slab right behind the main stone in this little alcove. I mean, it was heavily encrusted in like years of silt and sediment. It all had to be cleaned up and everything. But you could clearly see that it was a sword, about a short sword or long dagger about 18 inches long, with this 2-inch crossguard about 2/3 of the way up. And at that moment I thought, this is ridiculous. I mean, not only have we solved a 400-year-old or 350-year-old historical mystery and followed these historical clues here, but it's proving everybody's psychic messages to be right. And as far as I know, and again, as far as I still know, this is the first time anything like this had ever happened. And we were just completely kind of like gobsmacked.
And imagine, that is awesome. Now, you obviously had the sword examined. I think you brought it to a museum, right?
That's right. Yeah, we took it to a museum that specialized in Elizabethan stuff. And it was cleaned up. And when it was cleaned up, it was found to be made of a single piece of steel. And it was actually identified as a dirk, which is basically a short Scottish companion sword or fighting sword that they used to keep down the socks. You know, they have the kilt on and then the socks and like a garter on the side of the sock. And they keep these short swords or long daggers down the sock, and it would be pulled out and stabbed the unwieldy Englishman when he tried to sort of be in sword fighting with the Scots. It was quite a clever little weapon to have. But they were also used as ceremonial swords, and they were often possessed by noblemen and royal families with their crests on it. And on the crossguard, there was an insignia, a crest, a heraldic crest. And it turned out to be, it was immediately identified. We didn't even tell the museum anything about what it was supposed to be or even how we'd found it. And they said, well, that's the insignia of Mary, Queen of Scots. And she is the very person who was said to have actually possessed this green stone. So, okay, we've got this sword that could have belonged to Mary, Queen of Scots, clearly been there for years. But what really clinched it was, remember that the stone was supposedly called the Meoniah stone. Written along the blade in Elizabethan spelling were 3 words, Meiania for Mary. So we knew then that we were onto something. This had to be something that was the final clue, perhaps, as to where Humphrey Packington had hidden the green stone.
Now, you have all these clues, but no green stone yet. So how do you make these connections, and where do you go next?
Well, the next part is a bit complicated, but I'll give it a potted, very brief version of what happened. One person in the group decided to take the sword to the bridge and hold it and see if they could get any psychic impressions from it. And there was this girl that was there doing it, the girl who was the daughter of this woman, Marion, who had the vision, the dreams. She held the sword and kind of used it like a divining rod and kind of held it and said, I think there's something over there. You've got to look in that direction. Now, that isn't probably exactly how the sword was supposed to have been used, but that kind of put us in that general direction. Now, the thing was that the word Meiania comes from an ancient Greek kingdom. It was called Meiania. It was later called Lydia. It's in what part of what is now Turkey, on the coast of the Mediterranean. And the symbol for the kingdom of Meiania was a swan. And also Mary Queen of Scots was known symbolically to the Catholics of England as the Swan. That was her epithet, if you like. So there was all these swan connections with it. And in the direction that this girl had suggested we look, on the map, there was something, a bend in a local river, and the bend was marked on the map as, it's called the Swan's Neck. It wasn't just this, people started having dreams as well. This same girl, when she went home after having held this sword, went home, and that night she had a dream, and she dreamt that she saw a swan flying out of a tower, and around its neck was a pouch, and in that pouch, she felt in the dream, was the green stone. So she said, the green stone is around the swan's neck. Everybody else had no idea what she was talking about. But Andrew and I had found this swan's neck on this map, and we thought, that's got to be where it is. So kind of like that's sort of how we found it, clues and also more dreams. So eventually we went there, and Marion also had a dream, another dream. She felt that the stone was going to be at the end of an avenue of trees beside a river. When we got there, there was an avenue of trees, and right at the end of it, there was this mound. When the mound was dug into, about 3 feet down, the spade hit something, and it was clearly something metal. When we got it out, it was a brass casket about that big, so about 8 inches long, 5 inches wide, 5 inches deep.
And what were you thinking at this point when you actually pulled out this casket?
Well, first thing I'm thinking is, strangely enough, you think of the most ridiculous things at times like this. I'm thinking, who owns this land? Because we've already stolen an item from somebody else's land. I mean, is this common land? Can we just do this? That was what was going through. And I'm looking around thinking, if we get seen digging up this person's property, but there was nobody around. It was right in the middle of the countryside. But I don't know. By this time, I was kind of thinking, this is just getting more and more ludicrous. Again, it was all heavily encrusted with silt and sediment. When it was cleaned up and opened, and it was a heavy casket, inside there was a small green stone. It was about 3/4 of an inch long, 1/2 an inch wide, kind of like you'd have it to be set in a ring. There was no ring with it, but it was flat on the bottom and rounded on the top, like you'd have a stone set in a brooch or a ring. And it was about, I don't know, sort of 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 an inch deep, 1/2 an inch wide, 3/4 an inch long. So it's like on an oval shape but flat on the bottom. And we had it analysed, and it was made of simple jade. We thought it was going to be some exotic thing like an emerald or something. But no, it was. But when we actually compared it with the paintings of Mary Queen of Scots, it was exactly the same. It even had the same variegations in it, the same different colours. So we had found this green stone that had once belonged to Mary Queen of Scots, that had been sought after by the Catholics of England as some sort of holy relic, and people like John Dee and other occultists in the 1500s had thought that it held strange supernatural powers that could somehow bend reality. Now, I didn't believe any of that, but I just knew that reality had been bent somewhat and things had been going weird for us to find this. And I was pretty much, other people were probably more shocked than I was, because I'd been going at this all the way along and gradually being built up to it, you know, having more weird things added onto other weird things. So I was kind of getting used to it. But some other people, there was one person who saw it who felt sick when they saw it, because they thought, well, if this can happen, what else can happen? But at this point, I just thought, okay, we've got this stone. We couldn't find out who owned the land. In the end, we found it was owned by some the river department, the people who run the rivers, and who weren't in the slightest bit interested in anything we'd found. So we were able to keep it. The sword we discovered was found on the land of a local lord, a man called the Earl of Coventry, and he was absolutely fascinated by it. It was eventually given to him, the sword, and he had it put on display in a local museum in a place called Upton upon Severn, not far from where it was found in the centre of England, a museum called the Tudor House Museum, where it's still on public display to this day. But what's so weird about it is it ended up being that this house, this old Tudor house, which is the museum, was a place where Dr. John Dee had once lived. And it was completely coincidental that it ended up there. And he was one of the people who had been associated with this whole story of the green stone. So anyway, so we got to keep the green stone in the casket. And I'd say that the excitement was there. But somebody said, well, we've got to publish this in the magazine. And I actually said, as the editor, there's no way we're publishing this. No one's going to believe it. It's just, you know, just hold it for now. They're just going to think we're making it up. It's not exactly that we're investigating other people here. It's happening to us. It's going to put our credibility on the line. Besides, we've got to find out more about this thing before we do. So we didn't publish anything about it. We took it back to the headquarters, to the office, this old rambling Victorian building that we were using, had as the offices. And there we thought the story would really finish. But that is when things really started to get weird.
Yes, definitely. This is one of my favorite parts. So you have the stone. It's amazing that you're able to keep it, and then strange things start happening around the location where you have it, right?
Yeah, I mean, now when the strange things began, nobody associated it with the green stone. We thought when the events began, which were like poltergeist activity, if you like, that's what it seemed like anyway. When it began, we all accredited it to the fact that we'd been having a lot of people there who were mediums. We'd been doing seances at the magazine offices in sort of like to investigate the paranormal. So we'd had a lot of psychics there, a lot of mystics. We'd had people doing seances there. And so we thought at first it was something to do, well, I mean, I didn't know what it was, because at first I was skeptical that anything was happening at all. I thought it was people's imagination, or I was trying to find practical explanation for it. But people who thought that this is a poltergeist put it down to the fact that we'd had a load of people there that were interested in all this stuff and psychics and that. And that's what had caused it.
What kind of things were occurring?
Well, the very first thing that happened is that it started pretty low key. We began to get electric shocks from various appliances in the house. For example, like a cooker, a fridge, a refrigerator, people's electric typewriters. No one had computers back then. It was all electric typewriters and things, if you were lucky. You had to have a manual typewriter if you weren't. But people were getting electric shocks from appliances, and they couldn't understand why. Light bulbs started blowing far more frequently than you'd expect. And the electricity kept dimming and then suddenly getting brighter, and bulbs would explode. Now, we thought that at the time. No one was thinking that was poltergeist. They thought there's something wrong with the old wiring system in what was really a 150-year-old house, certainly well over 100 years old, and it wasn't in particularly good condition. And so we got the electric company around. They checked the wiring, and they said they couldn't find anything wrong with it. But then the first really weird thing to happen that was clearly something out of the ordinary was one night at about now by this time it's middle of winter, and it was like around 5 in the evening, and in England at that time in the winter it's dark. So it was dark, it just got dark. People were sitting around in the office. There must have been about 10, 15 people in the office working there, people typing, writing stuff up on the phone, that kind of stuff. And suddenly we noticed, I was in the front, one of the main office, the front room downstairs, and I suddenly thought, what's that? I'm thinking that somebody's left a cigarette burning or something, because in those days everybody used to smoke. And I thought, was somebody smoking a cigar or something? Because the whole place suddenly started to fill with this kind of grey smoke. And then you could hardly see across the room. And after about 5 minutes, the place, and I thought, there's a fire somewhere. And we started checking the place out. And we found that the smoke was occurring in pretty much every room in the place. And in corridors, behind closed doors, even in closets. And we thought, there's a fire. Where's the fire? And we checked the whole place. We couldn't find anything. The weird thing was there was a kind of incensey kind of smell to this smoke. It wasn't, it was like kind of frankincense or something. It was like a churchy smell to it. And we checked through the whole place and we couldn't find anything. And after about 10 minutes, the smoke kind of just dissipated until it was completely gone. But I assume it's got to be something to do with the wiring burning out in the place. And it's got to be pretty serious. So we turned off the electricity at the mains, and the next day we got the electric company back in, and they spent half a day checking the whole wiring in the place. They had lots of equipment that could register if wiring was, the casing of wiring had burnt out behind the walls. And they brought all this equipment with them, and they said, there's nothing wrong with your wiring. There's no sign of a fire anywhere. And we thought, that's just crazy. That night at 5 o'clock, just as it was getting dark, around 5 o'clock, we were in the office again. It happened again. The whole place, within about 5 to 10 minutes, filled with this smoke. And there was like quite a few of us checking the whole place out, couldn't find anything to account for it. And the next day, it happened again. And this time, loads of people were gathering there because we'd told them this has happened 2 nights just as it's got dark, and we must have had 25 people there waiting for it to happen. And it did. And we had people in every room trying to work out where it was coming from. And it didn't seem to come from any one location. It just seemed to kind of just gradually kind of, appear in the room as if, uniformly all over the place. And then it would just dissipate again. And this happened every night for about a week. And so many people were coming round to the office to see this that the local newspaper found out about it. They did an article all about this psychic magazine beset by weird happenings and smoke appearing and electrical anomalies taking place. And loads of people were trying to find out. They said, oh, you're hoaxing this, aren't you? It's some kind of hoax to sell your magazine or something. We said, well, see if you can find out how it's happening then. And in the end, we had TV film crews from local news stations come round and film it. No one could find out where this smoke was coming from, what it was. And after about a week, it stopped and it didn't happen again. But that was just the beginning.
Yeah, so after that, the events got a little bit more intense. You actually had some cases of moving objects, right?
Yeah, the first one that happened was there was a guy called Martin Keatman, who I originally wrote the book, The Greenstone, with eventually a couple of years later when we decided to write all this up. He was a student at the time, just working part-time with the magazine, just office help, really. and he was in one of the offices, and there was a speaker, big speaker for a stereo setup that was on the side on this shelf above a fireplace. And as he was there working away, he sort of like noticed movement out the corner of his eye, looked over, saw this speaker on the side wobbling on its own. He thought, what? And as he looked at it, he said he saw it literally rise into the air as he looked at it, move over some object that was like next to it, and then come crashing down onto the, onto the actual record player, as we used to have then, a stereo setup, an old-fashioned, and just smashed the lid of this record player. And he said, I'm telling you, I didn't knock it over. I saw this happen. I thought at the time, he's knocked this over, he's broken this guy's stereo setup, and he's just come up with some excuse. But that was just the first. I mean, loads of people in there started seeing things being thrown around, objects, like pens and things like that. People would normally not see it take off like Martin had. They'd be working away at a typewriter, and suddenly a pen from a desk next to them, even if they might have been on their own in the room, would suddenly come arcing across the room and crash onto the floor or hit them on the back of the head or something. In my case, I actually eventually saw one of these things. I was walking down a corridor on my own, and suddenly something came flying past my head, and it was a huge, great box of heavy magazines. If it had hit me on the head, it would probably have knocked me out. Just missed me and went crashing into a door at the other end of the corridor. This is about 25 feet it had gone from where it had been by the door, but both doors at the other end of the corridor were closed. No one was there at the other end to have thrown this, and it just went straight past me and crashed into another door. I mean, and this was the sort of thing that was happening. Chairs would, suddenly, like chairs with rollers on the bottom, that, typing chairs, would suddenly kind of move across the room on their own. And I mean, I didn't witness all that. The only poltergeist thing I personally witnessed was this heavy box of magazines. But loads of visitors to the office and people who worked there started, seeing and reporting these things. And even though you've got people there who were experienced investigators, if you like, and people who were interested in the paranormal, a lot of them were refusing to come into work, or at least they were certainly not going to work after it got dark in the place, because they thought it would be dangerous. What if somebody got hit on the head by one of these things? So that was the next level. And, but still, we were not associating this with the Green Stone. At this point, we thought, well, we've got a poltergeist case appearing on our own doorstep. Now, what happened at this point is that the electrical anomalies kept happening. When we got the next electricity bill through, something that should have been a couple of £100, $300 or something, ended up being about $2,000, about £3,000. And we're thinking, what? There is no way that at that time, I mean, you'd have to adjust it for inflation. That would be like saying you just got a bill for like 20 grand for 3 months, for an office that's just using electric, there's about 4 electric typewriters and a few cookers, and, how? It's all, and when the electric company came around, they said, what, are you running the whole street off your meter? They said it's just, and because we refused to pay this bill, they cut us off. And they also said, when we eventually did pay it, they said, we're not going to reconnect you because your wiring is clearly dangerous. We'll fix it. Well, we don't know how. So there was something clearly weird going on in the place. And so at this point, we couldn't any longer use the office as a headquarters for the magazine because we had got no electricity. So we relocated somewhere else. I got in touch with the landlords and said, look, you've got to, give us, we'd paid like a year in advance on the lease. And I said, you've got to give us the money back. We're moving out of here. The wiring's dangerous. And they disputed all this. And so basically we had a year to go on the lease and a place we couldn't do anything with. But we thought, well, this is pretty good really for a paranormal research magazine. We've got a poltergeist case to investigate right on our own doorstep, quite literally, or inside our own doorstep. So we thought, okay, although many people who had actually worked there refused to return to the building, quite a few of us were happy to go there, especially at night time, to see if we could record what was going on in some way. But even that got really weird, because one night Andrew Collins was sleeping overnight in a sleeping bag in the main office, and it was only lit by candles, but they were around the room somewhere because there's no electricity. And he woke up in the middle of the night to find flames leaping from his sleeping bag. And he managed to get out of it without getting burnt somehow. And he thought one of the candles had fallen over, but they were nowhere near him. He didn't smoke. I mean, basically his sleeping bag had spontaneously combusted. And so he ends up about a few days later on the cover of a local newspaper, a photograph of him standing there with his burnt remains of this plastic sleeping bag in his hands, with the word "strange happenings" as a headline above his head. And so that then got so many people interested that loads of people came to the house and started witnessing all sorts of things.
So when was it that you started making the connection that this was possibly being caused by this green stone?
Well, still at this point, I'm thinking this is an amazing poltergeist case. And it's caused by having all these people here in an old house doing seances and stuff. But the phenomena then started to assume a kind of completely new sort of level, because people started seeing apparitions. First of all, visitors to the place were saying, "Who's that guy outside the door or in the back room or whatever, dressed up in Victorian clothes with a top hat and a long frock coat? You know, what is it, some fancy dress thing?" And we said, "There's nobody there." We'd go out, there'd be nobody there. So it seems that there was some kind of apparition of this dark Victorian figure in the place. Okay, ghosts appearing. It is a Victorian house. But what became weirder is that people started reporting seeing a woman in the house, but dressed in contemporary clothes. This was 1979, so it was at the kind of height of the punk era. One person one day said, "Is that lad in the front room, that punk-looking lad, you know, they used to have the spiky hair and all that stuff?" He said, "Is he waiting to see you?" I said, "There's nobody there, is there?" We went in, there was nobody there. The next day, 2 or 3 people said, "Who's that punk lad hanging around outside your house?" We went out, nobody there. So not only were we getting ghosts from the past, or apparently seemingly ghosts from the past, but contemporary figures. There was another woman in contemporary clothes, looked like an ordinary sort of woman from 1979, that people saw. 4 people all saw her, nodded together, who claimed to have seen her walk through a wall in the place. So we're getting kind of characters from not only from the past, but from maybe some alternative version of the present. And then the weird, now, I didn't see any of these myself, but there was plenty of witnesses. But what I did see made me think, hold on a minute, there's got to have some connection here with the green stone. And this is the most incredible thing. The idea of having ghosts of contemporary people, weird, but okay. Victorian figure, not unknown. But we one day saw what can only, me and 2 other people, plus another guy who had just visited the place, and his dog, because of the way the dog was looking, all saw what appeared to be an Egyptian-looking woman, a virtually naked woman who must have been, I don't know, about 20 years of age, with like an Egyptian headdress on, the eye makeup, the whole thing, just floating in the middle of the office room. And we both thought, what the hell? I just thought I was seeing this in my mind's eye, but everybody else saw, and even this guy's dog goes, can see it. Now, once we're seeing an ancient Egyptian princess or whatever appearing in our house in the middle of Wolverhampton in central England, we're thinking, hold on, this is something, this isn't ordinary poltergeist hauntings, there's something. And of course, there'd been a connection between the green stone and ancient Egypt with this ancient Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten. So, but at the same time, just as that happened, Marion, again, the lady who'd had a lot of these visions early on, dreams, she got in touch and said she thinks that it is actually the green stone itself that is causing these disturbances. Now, we took the green stone out of the place. It was actually no longer in the place, it hadn't been for weeks, which again had probably stopped us thinking that it was anything to do with that, because now that was in the new place we were using as the headquarters. But the phenomenon was still going on. But Marion said that in her dream, she got the impression that something was telling her, someone was telling her that the green stone had kind of opened some kind of preternatural, supernatural rift in the Oaks Crescent, that's the name of the road it was in the Oaks Crescent headquarters of the magazine in Wolverhampton. And that if we didn't do something about it, it would just get worse. It would spread. It wasn't doing it somewhere else. It had already done what it was supposed to do when we brought it back to the house. And there was, you know, it didn't matter, it wasn't there. It's already opened this rift, is what she called it. And what was really weird is that over a period of a few weeks since the place had been abandoned, the furniture had been taken out, and the removal people claim they saw things getting shifted around as well. But since it had been emptied, the place was in relatively good condition. I mean, we could work in it, but over a period of a few weeks, plaster started falling from the walls, pipes rusted and burst. The ceilings began to collapse, floorboards rotted. It was all literally, you'd think the place after about 2 months had been abandoned for years. And Marion said to us, it's almost as if time inside the building is passing at an accelerated rate. And we noticed that people had spent time overnight there, a couple of nights, started getting grey hairs. Now that might just be because they were getting scared, right. But they were aging. And Marion said that in this dream, she got the most strong impression that if we didn't do something about it and neutralize the stone somehow, this not only would get worse, would begin to spread out from that building.
So were you able to do anything to close this rift and prevent this from spreading?
Well, again, it was only what Marion suggested. I didn't seem very likely to me. I thought, well, we had to bring the stone back there and do some ceremony with it. I don't know what you were supposed to do, work out what we'd done to make it start up in the first place and reverse it. But she said that she thought that it ought to be taken to to sacred ground. Now, the place she chose was an old ruined ecclesiastical building called White Ladies Priory, a old ruined abbey, medieval abbey, which was just outside Wolverhampton in the countryside. And this did have connections with the King Arthur legend because it was the supposed burial site of King Arthur's Queen Guinevere. Now, so somebody also in the magazine thought that that place was where the greenstone was originally made. Well, if it was, I can't see how it had anything to do with ancient Egypt. But basically, Marion said we should take the greenstone to this White Ladies Priory, as it was called, on a particular day. It was supposed to be 9:30 at night or thereabouts. And the time was something to do with when it was a full moon or something along those lines. I can't remember what it was exactly, but it had something to do with the alignments of the planets or something. But we had to do it at night, 9:30 on this particular day. I think it was, I've got a feeling it was February the 2nd, but I can't remember quite often. Maybe from winter anyway. So in the end, 9 of us went there. I think she said it had to be 9. I'm not quite sure if it just, but it was interesting that it was 9 because 9 Worthies was the name of this painting that the number 9 had been involved. The reason why we'd chosen 9 stones along and down originally was because of the number of the 9 Worthies in this painting. So 9 had something to do with it. So I think that was why we had 9 people there. But there was myself and Marion, Terry Shotton, the guy one of the chief investigators for the magazine. But the other people who were there were just people to make up the numbers. There was one guy who was a horticulture officer for the local parks department who'd heard about the story in the local newspaper and said, oh, if you do anything, you want me to come along, I'd be great. But he was a complete skeptic. He came along. There was a guy there who was a local magistrate. So if you can't believe him, who can you believe? And there was, but the one thing I must tell you about all these people, they're like throughout the whole of this weird goings on, they weren't all the same age. They weren't the same types of people. There were some people who were hippies, students, sensible middle-aged people, older people from different walks of life. And basically the group of 9 of us that were there that night, including Marion, of course, were basically a cross-section of British society. It's not just a bunch of, I'm trying to explain this because I don't want people to get the idea we're a bunch of freaked out hippies, all high on something. So when we got to, when we got to the White Ladies Priory, which is basically a ruined monastic building with kind of low walls, there's still some arches survive, etc. About 50 feet from the priory is this mound, which is an old burial mound, which tradition holds is where Queen Guinevere was buried. And Guinevere in the legend was supposed to have, in some legends, been buried with Excalibur. So anyway, Marion said we should place the stone on this old burial mound and something would happen at 9:30. And because she thought it would be quite destructive, she told us to all go back inside the ruined walls of the priory building and wait until it got dark and wait until 9:30 at night when something would happen. So we did. So we're looking through this old surviving arch in the priory, looking towards this copse of trees, this small wood which surrounds this burial mound where the stone had been left, and it's about 50 yards away, about 150 feet away from where we were. So I mean, I didn't really expect anything to happen. I thought, Marion would have some vision or something. But when it got to 9:30, and it pretty much was exact time, or 9:25, whatever time it was she said, around 9:30, there suddenly came these eerie screeches from the woodland area where the stone had been placed. And it was kind of like, well, remember I said that one of these guys, Mike Ratcliffe, he was a local horticultural officer. So he knew all about the countryside and noises animals made. And he said at the time, and he was interviewed later, and he said, no animals ever made noises like that. Well, I certainly had never heard it. It was kind of like a kind of, it sounded like a sort of throttled pterodactyl. Not that anybody knows how
Right.
pterodactyls make, but like they do in sort of Jurassic Park or something. If animals did make noises like that, they were long extinct. And it kind of like this weird screeching sounds. And then suddenly, in the complete darkness, you could just make out the outline of the woodland where the stone was. Suddenly, there came these 5 bright flashes of light. And I'm thinking, what the? And they suddenly kind of merged into these 5 balls of white light, about, 3 feet across each, that suddenly rose into the air within the trees and rose above the trees, these 5 balls of light. And I'm thinking, am I seeing this? And I'm looking around at they lit up the whole area about. There is no way that this was a joint hallucination. I mean, it's a pity that people didn't have cell phones back then, because, and everybody films everything these days, but we didn't have anything. They didn't even have video cameras then. It was just old cine film, and nobody had any of that. And you certainly wouldn't any point taking it in the dark anywhere. But it lit up the whole area. You could see the local farmland around, and you could see everybody's faces all staring at it. I looked around, and they floated in the air above, maybe 20 feet above the top of the trees, merged as one great big ball of light about, 6 feet across, like a sphere of light, that then started drifting towards us with this like crackling sound. But then it just went silent, drifted towards us, and then suddenly exploded about 20 feet before our faces, with this kind of almighty flash and this ear-shattering bang, and it just kind of went. Then everything was dead silent and dark, and you couldn't see a thing for a good few moments because the light in your eye, and everyone was kind of like, what the hell? Until somebody said, flee. And we just got the hell out of there. We just ran for it. I mean, forget being sensible researchers. We just ran back to the cars, which is, I mean, the lane where the cars are parked must have been, I don't know, a quarter of a mile from where we were, in the middle of nowhere. And we just ran. And as we were running back to the cars, I kept looking back over when my eyes were, you know, accustomed to the gloom again, back towards the trees where these lights had come from and the noises. And it was just all quiet. There was nothing. There was no sound. There was no movement. And we just got away from there as quickly as we could. And it wasn't until the next day we went back and collected the stone. And it was still there, still on this mound. There was nothing burnt. There was no sign that anything had happened. And after that, the phenomena, everything that was going on in that thing, in the house, just stopped. Now, for 2 years after that, the place remained empty. More, maybe 5 years. It was eventually sold by the landlords and converted into modern apartments. And as far as I know, nobody there has ever reported anything strange happening since. So, and as far as the stone is concerned, whoever kept it, you know, whenever the various people had it over the years, and they reported nothing strange ever happening again. So it seemed that Marion was right when she said that what we'd witnessed that night was the awesome power of the green stone being discharged. And that is where the story ends.
That is absolutely amazing. And I believe this would make such a fantastic movie. It's got everything. I mean, it's got adventure, it's got the paranormal, it's got hidden history. It's such a fascinating story. Do you know where the greenstone resides now?
Well, Marion kept it. She was the one who actually worked out how to stop the weird things from going on. So everyone kind of agreed that maybe she should keep it, and the casket. But sadly, she died about 10 years ago, because she was quite a lot older than us. There was quite a few of the people involved in this story have since passed because they were quite a lot older. They were middle-aged then. So now they'd be like, some of them are like still alive and 80 odd or whatever. But when she died, her relatives sold it or auctioned it off. They didn't, you know, I think they weren't too happy about this whole thing. They thought they were Catholics and they thought it was all a bit evil, so they just decided to sell it. But we don't know where it went to. I mean, the people who sold it, we don't know where they are. So there's no way of knowing what eventually had it to it. There's loads of legends going around about what happened to the greenstone. Maybe somebody needs to start a new search and try and find it. But I have no idea what it is. The sword, as I say, is still on public display in this museum. But the casket and greenstone, somebody told me the only kind of lead they had was that some occult group or some mystic society in America got hold of it. And it's supposed to be now somewhere in California, Los Angeles. But whether that's true or not, I've no way of knowing. But that's what I've heard.
Now, do you have any final conclusions as to what you think is behind this whole phenomenon of the greenstone? Do you think it is like a portal or a doorway that kind of changes time and space? What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't know. I do have some thought. Because I hadn't, after that, I kind of carried on investigating the paranormal. But unfortunately, everything after that was so tame that somebody, in the original film Poltergeist, that these guys saying, "Oh, once I saw this toy car move across the floor in over 6 hours, it must have moved 2 feet." And the parents are going, "Oh yeah," and they open this door, and there's all this stuff flying around in there. Of course, a little car moving across 2 feet over a night time isn't very much.
Exactly.
And it was like that with me. I'd seen so much weird stuff that going and investigating the occasional knocking in somebody's house, or a couple of people claiming they'd seen the ghost of their Aunt Griselda or something, really wasn't up to much. Even UFO happenings didn't seem much to me anymore. But I became fascinated by historical mysteries, which is why I stopped investigating the paranormal. And I wasn't interested in it. And I've had all these books published over the years, and have, made a name for myself in television, where I do various programs about historical mysteries. But so never really got back involved in the paranormal until this year, when a number of people who were involved in the story back then said, you've got to republish this book. I mean, when it was published, it sold pretty well back in 1979, but it kind of got forgotten, but the people were trying to get hold of it on eBay, people who had fascinated by the story, and it was going on eBay for like $500 for copies of the Greenstone, because there was so few of them around, the book. And I mean, I didn't write the book until about a year or so after all this had finished, a couple of years later. But that was it. After that, I wasn't interested really in doing any more to do with it. But when somebody said you should republish this, get it republished now as a 40th year anniversary, and do some event where all the people that are still alive from those days get together, and we did that, and I got all interested in it again. So I've started doing research along the lines that you've suggested. What is this thing? How did it happen? How did it bend reality? The various legends about this stone give it various different names. One of them is the philosopher's stone, which you may have heard from, and the alchemists believe could transmute base metals into gold. But also the philosopher's stone is supposed to have been something that, an ancient biblical stone that had the power that changing gold, lead into gold, was just an analogy for doing all sorts of weird things. But I've looked into the history of all this now, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And since I did that, I've investigated the people who originally had this stone, their descendants, the people who were also doing all sorts of weird occult things right up until the Victorian period. And I'm actually working on a book about that now. What was the green stone? How did it all happen? And I'm hoping to get that published in the next few months. So I basically just better leave you with that, because to start explaining what I think it is would take another hour and a half.
Right. And everyone, I highly recommend this book. Please go check it out. Graham, thank you so much for coming by tonight. Fascinating stuff. Before you leave, tell everybody where they can find your work.
Well, all my books are available on Amazon, amazon.co, or amazon.co.uk, or amazon.com. So my books are all published in America. The Greenstone by Graham Phillips and Martin Keatman can be found on Amazon. Just type in Greenstone. If anybody wants to know more about all my work, my website is grahamphillips.net, and on that site you will find descriptions of all my books. On the first page there's images of all my books. You click on those and you'll get pages and pages about those books, photographs, pictures, so you know all what they're about. Basically, it's very journalist friendly. You don't need to buy the books to find out what it's all about, because you can see it on my website. I've got a YouTube channel which is Graham Phillips Author, and if you look on there, I mean, I did have a Greenstone video up on there, but I took it down recently because I wanted to make a few changes to it. And I didn't realize, for some reason, I took it down. I didn't have to take it down. I could have kept that one there. But anyway, I did. So I'm going to be putting it back up in the next couple of days. So you can go there, and that video, it's half an hour long, and it's got all the sites that I'm talking about, some reconstructions of the things that took place. And it's got original interviews with some of the people who are sadly no longer with us, who were interviewed back in 1980, just a year after it happened, telling you all about this stuff. So you don't have to take my word for it. And you'll see why, if you watch this video, that these people are from such completely different walks of life. So you can look there. And if anyone wants to join my Facebook, Graham Phillips, author.
Very good. And your books cover so many topics that are perfect fit for my show. So we'll have to have you back on sometime.
I would love to do that.
Thank you so much for joining us, and you have an excellent night.
Thank you very much indeed.